Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining the show once again, Kevin Cole of the Unexpected Points newsletter, our resident analytics expert. When we need to understand something analytically, Kevin Cole, you are a man that we go to. And here's what I need to understand, Kevin. How good has Sam Darnold been versus the rest of this league's quarterbacks? Because I think my answer analytically is pretty darn good. What's your answer?
Yeah, I would say pretty darn good is the correct framing of it. Now, there's a couple different ways of looking at it. Now, I prefer the expected points added framework of valuing plays, being that it's at least the most accurate way of valuing what actually happened on a field, and you can combine a whole bunch of different play types and this and that. So as a starting point, at least. So from that sort of starting point, he's been top 10. And then if you make these different adjustments, which I make, which kind of, lower some of the outlier type of plays, give maybe credit to guys who lose more fumbles than you think they should, vice versa, interception worthy charted throws. He actually looks better. He looks like he's approaching, the top four, almost bumping into the top three of the NFL. So pretty darn good. But I think there's some reasons to think maybe the former, like saying a top 10 quarterback, has kind of been more accurate than a top 4 quarterback. But again, there are metrics that put him in that sort of area.
The PFF grade has him presently as the fourth highest quarterback in the league. Quarterback rating is somewhere in that range. We know that stat's got its problems, but it also has some merits, I suppose, as well.
Yeah.
And when we look at the details of how it's happened and talk about like what it means for Sam Darnold and the chances going into the playoffs, a lot of people want to talk about the future of the Vikings quarterback position. What really stands out to me is that he has not done it in some sort of way that would be lucky or random. It's a big giant dude who was drafted third overall, looking like a big giant dude who was drafted third overall. And when I look at the top quarterbacks in the league, just by PFF, Jackson, Burrow, Allen, Daniels, Mahomes, you know what those guys all sound like? They sound like big giant dudes who were taken at the top of the draft. And that's what stood out to me is it's been on arm talent, it's been on playmaking, it's been on resilience, all these things that Sam Darnold was drafted for back in the day.
Yeah, it has been. Now, for Darnold, if we kind of look back at him historically, I think it was the final 5 or 6 games of his rookie year and the final 5 or 6 games of his second year where he had, turned it around. He turned it around. So this is either maybe it's a good or bad sign, depending upon how far you're looking onto the future. But there's kind of this turned it around phenomenon, and then things would go poorly. Then when he was with the Panthers, he started off very strong, I believe. And then things kind of went downhill. So I think with Darnold, the case has always been that he's not going to be a guy you plug in who's going to check the ball down and there's going to be a lot of run after the catch and you're going to scrape by with good defense and good special teams, and he's going to keep the floor somewhat high and then keep the ceiling somewhat low and you'll sneak through. I mean, he's always been a guy who's willing, sometimes maybe his willingness to try to fit throws in is a little bit above where he could actually do it. He writes some checks that he can't cash sometimes on it, but it's happened less this season. So I think that was the whole thing about him coming over into this offense, playing with great receivers, playing with a great scheme and offensive coach, maybe building off of the little bit that he had learned when he was with Kyle Shanahan before coming over to San Francisco. Was he's always been the if quarterback. Like, if he can do this, then you could get this. And the big if was, if you don't have a 3 weeks in a row of 2+ turnover games in bad spots, also with some of these turnovers, that's always been his Achilles heel to this point. And he's done a little bit of that this year. Let's not, he's had some turnovers this year. He's actually had some of the bigger turnovers, some more costly turnovers, which is why there's some adjustments in his numbers. But for the most part, that hasn't been the case. He's given you the upside, which we've seen which was like the whole case for him going forward. And he's limited that downside. So he's a gunslinger, basically. He's a gunslinger who's maybe getting shot a fewer times than he is actually taking out other people with his gunslinging mentality.
That's what's been so impressive. And I remember you did some work on Darnold and his previous statistics where you were hunting for, like, is there a case for this based on his past? And the answer was not really. And I did some hunting myself and tried to identify when Darnold had favorable situations, which was not that often, but very specifically when he was running play action or when he had clean pockets or when his team wasn't losing. What did that look like? And it came out with some hints that maybe it wasn't going to be bad. And nothing, though, from the past pointed to it being this good. And when you look over some of his statistics on things that are affected by the coach, and I think short passing is affected by the coaching, and play action is affected by the coaching, and deep passing is affected by the wide receivers. All these things are crushing for Sam Darnold this year. And that is circumstance, but also I think he has just advanced his game. And after he hit the skids with the middle of the season with a couple of bad games in terms of turnover worthy plays, I think everybody thought, oh, this is kind of going back the way that you were talking about. And the fact that it didn't, I think, speaks to the coaching, speaks to who he has around him. And it also speaks to the fact that sometimes in this life, Kevin, people can grow and we don't see it coming with analytics. And you and I love them so deeply. Sometimes the past just doesn't tell us what's going to happen in the future.
That's true. That's true. I mean, the thing is, and this is obviously the critique of when you're looking at anything from an analytical perspective, is it doesn't capture the context, right? So, and this goes down to there's a saying by a famous statistician where the thing was all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. So, like, it's always wrong. If you're saying, I'm going to project what Sam Darnold's going to do in the future, it's not just that it's wrong because you're picking a single instance and he's not going to hit that exact instance. It's wrong because you can't capture all of Sam Darnold-ness versus all of every other quarterback's-ness that you're using to build this model to projecting them into the future. Now, a lot of the modeling that I've done, it's basically looking at their performance on a play-by-play basis, and then projecting out how do quarterbacks with that sort of similar performance, that much of a sample size, or how many plays that they've played, this and that, and what is their potential range of outcomes into the future. So the range of outcomes didn't look great, but, you know, it is a range, and there is a high end of the range, and he's hitting more of the high end of that range, which would seem to be possible. But even then, so I think kind of what we talked about earlier, the gunslingerness of him is probably the contextual input that's not part of that model, that shows more upside. I mean, I when I see someone, if they put up mediocre efficiency, but they threw 3 interceptions and they put up mediocre efficiency, I'll say, well, you know, they're probably not going to average 3 interceptions every single game going forward. So I'm more encouraged by that. And if someone doesn't throw any interceptions, doesn't take any sacks, and puts up mediocre efficiency, then you're saying to yourself, well, we kind of only really have downside in this scenario based upon how they have played. So I think that would be the thing for him, is like, maybe if you whittled it down further and further and projected guys exactly like Sam Darnold going forward, maybe you'd have a little bit more of a positive projection, but then you have fewer guys you're basing it on, so you're less confident in what you're projecting going forward. So I think the key, though, with him is, again, what we're talking about, having that upside. But, you know, I'm looking through his numbers this year. He's still, if you combine EPA or expected points lost on interceptions, fumbles, sacks, he still has the third most lost of any quarterback in the NFL this year. So he hasn't exactly become that different. It's just really that upside has skyrocketed forward, and it's still better than he was before on the downside. But he was by by far the worst in most seasons that he played when it came to these losses per drop back. Now per drop back, he's like top. He's in the bottom 10, you know, in total, because he's played so much and he's had so many dropbacks. He's only below, I think, CJ Stroud and Geno Smith in that number so far this season. So he's still doing it. He's still a Tony Romo gunslinger. There's still going to be that downside. So I guess that's the good and the bad, right? You could have a great playoff run with a guy like this who doesn't throw in those interceptions, or it's possible you could have a bomb out in one particular game. And that's why I think the defense being good is really key to giving him the ball back and giving him more chances to be able to even things out in a game.
No, that's a great point because there has been, if we start to add it up, a lot of sacks that he's
Yeah.
taken this year. And I
But
think
the offensive line looks bad by my metrics, at least that I run on there. So it depends on how much is on him, how much is on the line. But yeah, yeah,
and I think that how much is on how they want to play
yeah.
because the NFL now has so many short passing offenses. The Vikings are just not really one of them. They've started to adjust to try to stay on the field a little bit longer, but on the whole, they have one of the highest average depth of targets in the league. They are pushing the ball down the field. And Kevin O'Connell, when we were asking him earlier this year about, well, they're talking about the two high shells. Mel Kiper wants to ban two safeties playing high and so forth. Kevin O'Connell was laughing because they see that all the time. And yet they're just solving it with a guy who has the arm to be able to push it down the field. You know who it kind of reminds me of? I don't know if you have any comparables in mind for Sam Darnold this season and just how he plays. It reminds me of Carson Palmer when he was playing for Bruce Arians, where there were going to be some sacks, there were going to be some interceptions, but that's what happens when you have a guy who has that arm talent and is pushing it down the field. And there was some volatility to that. I think where Sam Darnold over the last 8 weeks has really curtailed that is when he's playing within the structure of the offense a little bit more. I think earlier in the middle of the season, he kind of did go back to a little bit. I can make that throw. I got to make that great play. And he's been really good recently at just not doing that as much, saying like, okay, I'm just going to take this sack because it's not there. And the offensive line, we've seen them, I think, go downward without Christian Darrisaw eventually over a long period of time. They're kind of surviving at this point, which is a concern going into the playoffs. But that's one of the reasons I think he's taken some smart sacks. Like, oh, I'm beat. They got me, and I'll just take the loss here. But if I was to look back, I think that that's how they want to play. They want to push it down the field and get explosives, which also does come along with holding the ball for 3 seconds sometimes, and sometimes having to take a sack.
I mean, it's really in some instances this, split second, like nanosecond type of um feel for the game, which sometimes he hasn't displayed in the past. And there have been instances. I mean, I'm looking through his plays so far this year. He did have like a play where they lost more than 10 expected points because he was starting at his own 44 and it was a fumble 6 situation from a 1st and 10. So I think there's a slight bit of calibration that has to go on even with gunslingers where you're saying, it's 1st and 10, or he threw a couple interceptions on 2nd down in the opponent's territory where it's like, you don't really have to force those sort of situations. So it's making those split decisions. And sometimes it's like taking a sack versus a fumble 6 type of notch. That's where he's had problems. And I think for the most part, he's been pretty good about that. But there have been some hints of this. But I do think going back to the defense, when he was having those problems, the defense was really performing at such a high level at that point in time that, again, you give him the ball back. It's one of those things where you have this high variance output, which on the average is very, very high. That's the type of thing where you want to have as many chances as possible. You want to have the ball as many times as possible. You want to be pushing the ball down the field as many times as possible. And then you're saying at the end of the game, I'm hoping that these big plays are going to outweigh the potential losses.
Let's compare Sam Darnold to the other quarterbacks in the NFC that he's going to have to face here in the playoffs. And I'm not sure if he's going to get a week off or not. We're going to find that out just as we expected going into the season, right? That
Yeah,
they'll
of
be
course.
playing for the first round bye. Just don't listen to those old shows from the offseason. But we were talking the other day about, like, does he have a case for being the best quarterback in the NFC going into the playoffs? And I don't think that's quite there, but it's also not there when it
Mhm.
comes to how he compares from this year. If we just put him up against the Jared Goff and etc. for in the NFC, I think that it's kind of 3 or 4 quarterbacks that he's right in that same range with, but he has an argument for having had, I think, the best season of any NFC quarterback. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, he's definitely in the mix there. I mean, I only have a marginal difference between him and Jordan Love. So this is the weird situation where, depending upon what the numbers say, I'll have different fan bases who love me on a weekly basis. So Green Bay Packers, they love me right now because I had Jordan Love on a per play basis, per dropback basis, because he missed some games, looking really good, looking pretty close to being some of those other guys. Now, he's missed some time. He's actually used less than Darnold is used, as far as not just baseline pass ratios, but even when you adjust for expectations based upon score and this and that, they're actually much run heavier offense that they're using in Green Bay. So those are two negatives to him, but he looks really good. So, when I put out the numbers for this last week, it got into, cheesehead sphere or something, and everyone pumped it way up. But I think there's also Darnold is right there with everyone else. So yeah, there's an argument for him. There's an argument for Love. Um, even guys like Baker Mayfield are playing pretty well this year. It's just you don't have Brock Purdy necessarily in the mix. He's still playing well, but obviously the team is out, so you don't really have to worry about him. You have Jaden Daniels, who's playing pretty well in the NFC. I think the theme may be outside of Jared Goff, where Jared Goff, you're kind of, what you're going to get, and this is the high end of what you're going to get. We got a lot of more question marks, I think, with these other guys. Like, who is Jordan Love? Who is Daniels? Who is Darnold necessarily going to be going forward versus what we've seen now versus what we've seen in the past? There's a lot more question marks in there. And then you have Goff, where, if anything, if you're talking about winning a Super Bowl, maybe you don't want the surer thing that is playing at the top end of his range of outcomes versus these other guys, which maybe can even give you a little bit more, or maybe can maintain this level. It's more possible, more downside, but then also we're talking about winning a Super Bowl. It could be just as good.
The difference between the other quarterbacks that you mentioned and Jared Goff, I think, is a visual thing. The playmaking, the the ability to move and run and play out of structure, where this did become an issue a little bit for Goff in some of the bigger moments. There was a fourth down where he's rolling out and he's got a receiver and he just kind of threw it into the ground because he's not really that type of quarterback, where we've seen when things break down around Sam Darnold, that it isn't just the coaching from the quarterback whisperer, which, hey, Kevin O'Connell, coach of the year, in my opinion. But sometimes some dude's got to make an awesome play. And that's exactly what Darnold did to beat the Seattle Seahawks. Before I ask you about just matchups and what you think the Vikings' chances are to go all the way, I'm required by law to ask what you think of Darnold and his future, and the idea of potentially franchise tagging him, extending him, and so forth. So I think our audience, I've been trying to just not make this a debate show about Darnold's future, because there's not too many opportunities where your team goes 13-2. So we'll keep your eyes on the prize. But your take on what they should do at this position in the future.
I think there's a lot of overconfident maybe takes I've seen out there as to what they should do. There's different directions that you can end up going here. I saw something the other day where the theme of a lot of these takes has been, and I'll use it to illustrate maybe my way of thinking about it, would say like, well, the play you're going to get from JJ McCarthy, it's like maybe you have a 20-25% chance of playing as well as Sam Darnold is playing. I would also say is, like, what's the probability that Sam Darnold plays as well as Sam Darnold is playing right now going forward? It's not 100. Trust me, it's not 100% that something like that is going to happen. If anything, it might be somewhat similar to that sort of number. So I guess the way that I would look at it, and it all depends on what their plans are for free agency and this and that, is just, if you're going to franchise them, it can be done because you have that extra wiggle room with McCarthy there. He's proven like that it's worth having a high quality backup going forward. But at the same point in time, I don't know. I think he's earned the right to go someplace else and start someplace else too, just from a human quarterback perspective. So it would kind of almost be like holding him hostage a little bit in that regard. You could trade him off of the franchise tag depending upon what you think you're going to get in a trade versus if you're not going to sign guys in the offseason, then you'll get that late third round pick probably for him in the 2026 draft. So I don't know. I think I'd be willing to let him walk and go forward with McCarthy, and that being the plan. But obviously, there's a lot of risk involved. I mean, it's not quite the same thing as bringing in Kirk Cousins off of having a great season in the past, because you figure like Darnold has a lot more talent. Well, why is his name escaping me now? The Minnesota Miracle quarterback that
Oh, Case Keenum. Yeah, Case
Case Keenum.
Keenum.
Like, so he's
Yeah.
not Case Keenum, right? But there's some, that was a very, very good season, right? That was a very, very good season where you still decided you needed to move on at quarterback. So it's not that type of situation, but I guess I wouldn't get too locked in on the fact that this is the Sam Darnold necessarily you're going to get going forward as pieces start to move around and things start to happen there. So I don't know. I think I would be okay letting him walk and taking the comp pick, knowing that there's going to be downside critiques that you're going to get if you don't play well next season. And it's going to be tough to replicate what you did this year. But you have to realize replicating what you did this year is not the median outcome. Like, that's a high-end outcome for next season also.
So I guess my question would be, why would it be hard to replicate it? Because what's changing? Like the Justin Jefferson, how about this for a stat? When any quarterback throws the ball toward Justin Jefferson in his career, their quarterback rating is 111. This year, when Sam Darnold throws the ball at Justin Jefferson, his quarterback rating is 111. Like, he's not changing. Addison's not changing. Hawkinson, Kevin O'Connell, maybe they get a new running back. Maybe they run the ball a little better. Maybe they get some guards. Maybe, I mean, the offensive line can be improved with Christian Darrisaw coming back. The environment that has been responsible for his success, everybody's under contract. So it's not one of those, well, they're going to lose this guy, and this guy, and then suddenly it's going to be different. And the other part of it too is that for me, the sample size has extended out beyond just this year for Sam Darnold going back to 2022. And if my computer doesn't melt, I can use Pro Football Reference to get this exact statistic on Darnold from his numbers since 2022. But we're talking about a long time in our lives now that Sam Darnold has been a good quarterback. It isn't just like yesterday this started happening. And the physical skill has to go into this, that this is not a person who just sort of, came out of nowhere with this. Like, this is who he was supposed to be as a quarterback. He was supposed to be this good. Trying to make this work, and it's not really working. So anyway, but the point just being that, like, even at the end of 2022, when he didn't have Matt Rule coaching him, he had a pretty good look. He was good in San Francisco, and now he's been really good here. With Keenum, we were talking about an undrafted guy who was short and didn't have a good arm and like had a pop-up season. So that's the difference for me, is that this looks to me more like someone who just came into their own as a quarterback in their mid-20s, as opposed to, hey, this is just a super random pop-up season. And because even he's outperforming even the Geno becomes a good quarterback 2 years ago, and Baker has become a good quarterback. He's outperforming even those guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just that. Again, when I say it's unlikely to replicate what we've seen so far this year, it's just because like the outcome is so high. I mean, and again, it's, if you look at like the offense for this year, and you're right that it's been more the running game that's underperforming versus the passing game, but still, I mean, overall in EPA per play offensively this year, ranked 11th this year. Now it's 7th in passing and 22nd in running. So there's a split there, obviously, in what's going on. And it's 5th in success rate passing, but because of some of the larger mistakes that we talked about, that kind of drags down performance a little bit. Whereas if you look, defensively on what the team's done so far this year, like it's up on one of the top defenses so far this year. So, it's just like the defense is probably not going to be as good as, because defenses just generally bounce around as much. And when you have this many wins, and again, if you want to go into the one score game thing, I mean, they're a really great team, but some of those could flip the other way. Some of those, turnovers can flip the other way. I'm just saying it's difficult to have this great of a season. Even if you're the Kansas City Chiefs, it's difficult to say that you're going to have this many wins going forward. It's not necessarily about the team specifically. I don't know. I'm just a little skeptical of flip the switchedness when it comes to different quarterbacks going forward. And I do think if you say with Darnold that this, if this is his peak potentially, I just don't know if saying it depends on, obviously what their feelings are about McCarthy. If just saying we want to still get, still try to get a little bit higher for what we're going forward as being a peak type of season from someone. I just think it's still reaching out there. It's risky. Don't get me wrong. It's a risky proposition to do this sort of thing. But it also goes into the fact that you're going to have to you're going to have to give him a pretty huge deal if you wanted to, I think, bring him back and say you're going to make this guy your starter, and what you do with McCarthy, everything else going forward. It'll just be an interesting situation to figure out exactly how to negotiate that, especially in a year where there's not a lot of good quarterback prospects coming in. So there's probably another team that's going to want to make a big bid for him.
And I mean, if you do the franchise and trade thing, there's someone who will come in probably with a pretty darn good offer for them. Here's the stat. I got it to work. 22 starts, last 22 starts since 2022, 41 touchdowns, 15 picks, 102 quarterback rating, 8 yards per attempt for Sam Darnold. And why don't we, because you're the analytics guy, get you a win-loss record since then, just to do that. Let's see, 17-5 is the old win-loss there, which of course is impacted by many things, but that's a pretty big sample size. I mean, I think if we didn't know what Sam Darnold had done before, like, think about Jordan Love. What would Jordan Love have done had he been given to the New York Jets over the first 3 years of his career? I'm guessing it wouldn't have been good. And then he gets the time to develop. So with Jordan Love, who's like the same age as Sam Darnold, we're like, oh, he's just good, because we never saw him be crap in the past when he definitely would have been, but he didn't play. If Sam Darnold had come out of college at 22 and didn't play for 3 years and then showed up and did this, we would just assume for 22 games, well, this is just an elite quarterback. So I think that there's just been so much emphasis on what he did 5 years ago and less on what he's done in the last 22 starts and a handful of other appearances. I also think that you could just hedge on this. Like, you could franchise tag, you could play through next year, you can increase the sample size, and JJ McCarthy will be the ripe old age of 23 if he's playing in 2026. So let's compare their Super Bowl chances, because if he wins the Super Bowl, Kevin, he's probably coming back.
That's probably true. Yeah. I mean, okay, well, let me say one thing about like what we think about these guys versus what they've done in the past. I mean, I would say this is not just a Sam Darnold thing with me. It would probably be any quarterback thing with me. Like you say, Jordan Love. I mean, I'm still skeptical necessary that Jordan Love we just don't know with these guys. This is kind of like my whole thing is like we know a lot less than we think we do about a lot of different quarterbacks. I mean, I wrote this article about Jalen Hurts being a great pick at the point in time, even though they just signed Carson Wentz the year before, because I said, the Eagles are in the bucket, a very large bucket of we're not sure who we have at quarterback in Carson Wentz. We're just not quite sure yet. I mean, over the offseason, I was very skeptical of CJ Stroud versus some others. Not that I thought he was bad, but it was like, guys, we can't just pencil in, a rookie quarterback who plays well, who got a little lucky when not throwing interceptions, when there were some interception-worthy plays and things like that, and just penciled them in saying going forward, they're going to be X. So it's kind of just a larger degree of skepticism I have. I guess my issue with the franchise tag is I feel like in a cold-blooded, analytical sort of way, it would be franchise tag, have him as the backup, play McCarthy, see what happens, maybe bring in Sam Darnold. But I don't know. I feel like he's earned it. He's earned it to go be a starter somewhere else if that's really your plan. And so maybe it just seems contentious to me, but maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe Darnold, maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe we shouldn't care about that.
It might be only if Sam Darnold got off to, well, if they sign him to a multi-year deal, then if he got off to a bad start for next year, even through 2 or 3 games, then all of a sudden it's like they screwed up.
Like if you could get a Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield deal done, yeah, are you even gonna be able to get that at this point though? Like, or is it gonna have to be higher? I guess that's another question. So again, there's what ifs that are part of this. If you could get a Geno Smith deal for him, fine. because that's one where you can actually walk away after a season or two, and it's not really a big deal. I guess I'm operating under the impression that maybe you can't, but maybe you can. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the franchise tag in their back pocket, that allows them to have more negotiating power
Yeah.
than you would normally think. And I just feel like the franchise tag makes the most sense because you could push other contracts down the road. You could play him for another year. And then if he has another year like this, then you know that you just have an elite quarterback and you can operate with that. But this year, they've been dealing with huge amounts of dead cap space. $40 million spent at the quarterback position, and they were still able to go 13-2 to this point. Sometimes I just get frustrated sometimes where people act like if you give a quarterback a single dollar, that your franchise just crumbles into the Mississippi River. I'm like, look around. The
Yeah, yeah. I
Lions
mean,
paid their quarterback, the Eagles, the Packers, all these teams have done this. It's not like it just becomes this impossibility to deal with a really good quarterback who's getting paid.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the rookie quarterback contract thing got vastly overplayed by the fact that you had a bunch of like good quarterbacks enter the NFL, and yeah, they did well, and some guys made it to the Super Bowl because they were good, not because they were getting paid a small amount. So yeah, I agree. All you got to do is like look at some of these free agent signings the first during the legal tampering period, and then you're like, well, look at this money. This money is basically just being blown up in smoke a lot of the time. So yeah, it's really just about hitting that elite sort of quarterback outcome. Like there's so much value in that you can't overpay these guys. So that's why again, like I'm advocating for taking multiple shots at the position. So I'm fine with that. It's just I just don't know with Darnold. Like, do you have to start him next year then? Like, you have to put McCarthy as the backup. If you bring him back on a franchise tag, it's just a weird situation because as much as Darnold's playing well, if they don't win the Super Bowl this year, let's say Vikings, sorry guys, don't win the Super Bowl this year. He plays poorly in week 1. There'll be someone asking for JJ McCarthy to come in week 2. Okay. I'm telling you right now, he could be playing lights out preseason, look great for the first quarter, and then they lose the game because he throws 3 interceptions or something, and people are already calling for JJ McCarthy. So I don't know. It's a weird situation.
It is indeed complicated, and we'll just have to see how it ends up playing out. But I think that your main disposition of looking at the quarterback position and saying projecting it forward is the hardest thing in sports. I
Yeah.
mean, go back and look at, and Mike Sando does that amazing piece with quarterback tiers each year. And we've got so much data on that now that I think it tells you something. And what it tells you is that every year, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are going to end up at the top and Patrick Mahomes. And every year, those guys are going to be the best quarterbacks in the league. But everything else is always in a state of shuffling around. And if you look at it going into this year, I think they had the highest rating ever for tiers for Kirk Cousins this year. And he's had the worst year of his career. And Sam Darnold is 24th or something and is playing like only maybe a tier behind Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, who are going to compete for the MVP. So it's a crazy world. And that's what makes it so fascinating for problem solvers such as ourselves. Now, I do want to weigh the different NFC teams versus the Vikings.
Sure.
The hard thing about that with you and I right now is that there's two very different circumstances that they could be playing under in the playoffs. You're either sitting at home, chilling, watching the first round, and then getting to play at home, or you're having to go on the road to Atlanta or Tampa Bay or Los Angeles and road through the entire playoffs. How big is that gap in a difference as they face these next 2 weeks with a chance to win the conference?
I mean, I think it's a huge difference. At the same point in time, obviously, it's possible to not get out of it. There's only one team that ends up getting that bye, but it's kind of like a huge relative advantage to have that because there's only one team at this point, where there used to be 2 teams for that. But at the same point in time, when you have 7 teams, making the playoffs, and only one of them has a bye, then it's even if they're the best team, it's kind of more likely one of the other teams is going to advance out than it is just by the number. So no, I think it's a big deal. Um, it's just really hard. Like I would have said, maybe I had some skepticism about the Lions in particular, if they have to be outside of a dome. But Goff's actually played okay in a couple of outdoor games this year. But then again, it's like literally only 2 outdoor games or something he's played all season long. And once things start to get worse, so I don't know. I think maybe for a team like Detroit, I'd be more inclined to say them getting a bye because you won't get one of those low end Goff outcomes in one such situation, but one less opportunity for that, and then getting to play at home would be more important than for other teams. But I think it's a critical thing that all teams want to have.
So, how do you weigh the current version versus the bigger picture? The current version of the Detroit Lions is they have half a defense or less. The current version of the Vikings is maybe getting stronger as the season goes along. On defense, they're going to get healthier than they were against Seattle. I think that was a factor against Seattle that they were missing Harrison Smith, Ivan Pace Jr., and so forth. But the present version of the Vikings, they've got 1-score wins. You know who else has 1-score wins? Lots of people. That thing drives me nuts because you can outplay a team completely or play 50-50 and you win. And it's like, oh, it's completely random. Like, well, I don't know. I mean, if you have the ball for 42 minutes against the Jaguars, you have run 30 more plays than them. I think you played better in the football game. So that's become a little bit of a.
If you're projecting 1-score wins, the best input would be wins. Like who has the most wins is the team the most likely to have the most 1-score wins. So
right,
yeah,
right. I just sometimes it gets a little bit like people get obsessed with that. They really beat the brakes off the Bears in Chicago, and then they recovered an onside kick, which no one ever does. And I don't know. Anyway, but weigh the big four for me in your mind in the NFC: Packers, Vikings, Lions, and Eagles.
I mean, I still have the Lions, but they're all very near the top. And when it comes to the Lions defense, this is what I'll say. I'm sure there are experts out there who can grind the all 22 and figure out like the defensive formations and how the different guys fit in and can think that they have like some great take about these injuries. And yeah, cluster injuries are problematic, more problematic than single injuries that happen. At the same point in time, we almost always overestimate the effect that non-quarterback injuries are going to have on a team. I mean, my perfect example was, I think it was 2 playoffs ago, the Bengals had a bunch of offensive line injuries and they were going to Buffalo, and everyone was like, oh, they're toast. Like there's no way they can protect Joe Burrow and they're toast and this and that. And then they did protect him pretty well. He played well. And then I heard the takes of like, it doesn't matter that they have any of these injuries. Like there's no effect from any of these injuries because they played well this one game. And it's like, okay, everyone take a step back. So like, I think it hurts them, but this is what the defensive coordinators and other people are getting paid for, is to find solutions. And I do think they can find some more solutions, and they have been that good that I'm still going to lean there. And then maybe in a second tier, pretty much bunched up completely together, the Packers and the Vikings, and I think the Eagles are right on their heels. It'll be interesting to see with the Eagles because they've been a little bit more fragile when it comes offensively to what they've done this year, honestly. So if they can clean that up, that's fine. And their defense, we'll see. Their defense has been really, really, really good, but their schedule is also not very challenging. So I don't know. It's really amazing, like how good the NFC North is generally. And now when you put the Eagles in there, you do have a lot of teams that are pretty good without having San Francisco in the mix, which we probably wouldn't have expected before the season started.
Yeah, sometimes when it comes to defense in the modern day and not like 2000 when the Ravens did the thing, it's like your defense is great until it isn't, and you better have an answer when it isn't. And that's what happened to the Vikings in 2017. They had the best defense in the league in points, passing, and rushing, and then it just wasn't. For whatever reason, they got tired or the matchup or whatever it was. They go to Philadelphia and the Eagles are moving the football and they just didn't have an answer offensively. And I even thought that last year from San Francisco at times in the playoffs, where they had, I think, the third best defense in the league by points, and Detroit's moving the football against them the whole day, and they needed a failed 4th down, but they also needed to come through offensively themselves. And all these teams have the offensive answers. Detroit has the most offensive answers, even without David Montgomery. And Philadelphia, I just don't know what to make of. Like, they're not a great passing team. they're a good passing team. The Vikings are a great passing team. Detroit is one of the best, and the Packers, at least over the second half of the season, once again, are going into the playoffs as an elite passing team. I would tend to think that Philadelphia, if I'm just picking like who kind of might get upset, it might be them. And that's also the defense is an example against Washington. Like they're great until Jaden Daniels starts making crazy plays and throwing with anticipation touchdowns and stuff. And then all of a sudden you give up 30 points and you lose. And do they have I know Kenny Pickett played, but like, do they have the answer to go back and forth with somebody offensively where I think the Vikings have shown with Darnold in this passing game that they do, as they've had to do a couple times as their defense has maybe been a little more leaky as the season has gone along.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everyone. It's so close, right? We're talking about very, very thin margins between all of these different teams. But yeah, but I think when it comes to defense, it's not the same as the past. I mean, run defense is like more stable than pass defense, and obviously the game's just not as much about the run as it used to be. And I just think in the past it was more about kind of like out executing your opponent, and if you have a very talented defense, you could do that week in and week out. And there's just too many counters to counters to counters now, and with quarterbacks who are mobile, and that just blows up even if you do out execute someone in the first 3-4 seconds of a drop back pass, that it just introduces that variance that makes defensive play extremely difficult to maintain and be stable going forward.
Okay, last question, because I know you're going to be grinding away at this and arguing with people on the internet. Who do you think is the MVP of the National Football League, Kevin?
I mean, I'm going to lean Josh Allen on this only because even from a stats-based argument, he does have actually better EPA stats than Lamar Jackson. And I know people think that's impossible. They said I'm on social media. I see graphics, like I see numbers that come up that show passing yards and show INTs and show everything else. Now, what those don't show, and this is where the difference is, which is extremely weird to say when we're talking about Lamar Jackson versus another quarterback, right? Is to say that Josh Allen pulls ahead of Lamar Jackson because he takes fewer sacks. Which again, that's conveniently excluded from like all metrics versus interceptions, even though in total more value is lost via sack than via interception in the NFL. So he's taking fewer sacks. He's actually best in the NFL for sacks. He has more rushing value, not more rushing yards, but he has more rushing value because of all of these short conversions. So like versus Lamar Jackson, he has more rushing value. And then the rushing value thing becomes even enhanced further for the fact that Jackson's had some more fumbles. Now, I know some of them Jackson fans will immediately point out these were like aborted plays where he's trying to hand it off. And I mean, I heavily discount those. So even with that heavily discounted, I'm going to lean Allen. And I know, then I'm willing to entertain his team has a better record. Then I'm willing to entertain the fact that the guy, at least in my opinion, I think has been the second best quarterback in the NFL since 2020. And he doesn't have much to show for it when it comes to accolades or anything like that. So, I think those factors also would have me lean Allen anyway. But I think anyone who tells you that this is like a stats versus vibes wins sort of argument is really just not, like, that can just be thrown out. That's not true. Like, stats are very legitimate for both of them right now. Which way you want to lean is up to you, but this is you can't say that that's really what the argument is about this year versus honestly last year. That really was the argument. There were multiple quarterbacks with clearly better stats-based cases than Lamar Jackson, and he had the best defense and special teams in the NFL, and he won games down the stretch that looked really good. I mean, he was awesome. He played like an MVP the last 5 weeks of the season, but not the first 11 weeks of the season, 12 weeks of the season.
I mean, it's very much splitting hairs, and
Yes.
maybe you just have to go tie goes to the guy with more wins. I don't. You
Yeah,
just have to do
I'm
that.
fine in that circumstance. I'm not fine
Yeah.
doing it when it's like clearly a difference
Right.
there. And I do think Allen. I mean, I feel bad for the guy. Generally, this is a guy. First of all, I was a huge Josh Allen doubter coming out. I was a huge Josh Allen doubter after his first and second season. The idea of like, oh, he's improved from bad to like from awful to bad was some sort of like great trajectory. But, hey, he did magically turn things around after that. And again, he was second team All Pro, I think, in 2020. But other than that, he has nothing to show for it. He's gotten his heart ripped out multiple times in Kansas City, despite playing out of his mind in certain games. So I don't know. I just feel like he really has been that good. And I would put him above Lamar Jackson for right now, as far as who's the best quarterbacks in the NFL after Patrick Mahomes. So, for all those reasons, I'm willing to default to him.
And I also think that it's just been more on Josh Allen's shoulder. And I mean, they're both like the whole offense, but Josh
Yeah.
Allen does not have that many weapons to work with. And it seems like it's just him. I don't even think I've heard of the guy who he was throwing the ball to out of the backfield over and over again against Detroit. Like,
Yeah.
this is like a third down David Palmer type of back that he's throwing the ball to here. So, but either way, both very, very much deserving. So you're saying that a 2018 highly talented, physically gifted quarterback that you were skeptical about ended up okay, interesting.
Yeah, third year breakout rare.
Hmm.
Whatever year are we on here? Breakout is I guess Gino. You have but even Gino, like, come on, how much upside do we have? We really have there, but yeah.
Yeah, we did kind of see the downside there with him in Seattle. Anyway, well, we'll see if we're talking about maybe the next time you pop in the shows for a Super Bowl matchup. How do they match up with Buffalo in the Super Bowl? We'll see.
Why not?
To say it is not crazy for the first time in a very, very long time for me covering this team. So it is good times over here. Kevin Cole, Unexpected Points newsletter. It is terrific and great follow on Twitter as well. And I'm sure you're on 6 other social media sites,
I
a Blue
haven't made the journey
Sky.
yet. I haven't made the journey yet. We'll see. We'll see. I've been fool me once, shame on you, sort of situation here. We'll see if it sticks on any of these other ones.
I I have one. We'll see. We'll see how
I
it
mean, do you
goes.
have to do it twice? Do you have to enter the stuff twice? Like you're
There are applications that can
like, what
post
are
to
we doing
both.
here? What are we doing
But I've
here?
been even too lazy to kind of do that. So yes, I've just been copy and paste. I've been like a bot link account over on Blue Sky where it's just like
I
I wrote
probably
an
should have
article
done it
here.
just because
Yeah.
people are like really enthusiastic, at least
Yeah.
initially, and they're like, "Oh, I want to click on all of our fellow comrades over here on Blue Sky." But I was like, I can't do it. I'm sorry. Like I already lived through Threads and whatever else, and Mastodon, and never established anything. So I'm keeping it here, and then you can always come over later. It's not like if I come over in 6 months, no, everyone's going to refuse to follow me because I was blasphemous, stay not coming over earlier. So we'll see.
2025 problems, I guess. Anyway, well, before this goes off the rails entirely, Kevin Cole, I appreciate you, man. Thanks for making the time here, especially in the holiday season. So I really, really appreciate it. Great stuff as always.
All right. Thanks for having me.